So, of course, all the talk after the debate is how weak Joe Biden is looking. There's not really a whole lot of bad press, I would say, going towards Donald Trump right now. They're trying to manufacture this being a bad thing with Trump's comments about, we're really fucking bad, Kamala Harris, or whatever he said about her. They're trying to make that into something that it's not. One thing that I didn't really notice until I saw this video in my feed was that there hasn't really been a lot of ringing endorsements of Trump. There's just been stuff saying that Joe Biden is bad. And I didn't realize that this was the case. I just kind of thought that it was assumed that Rand Paul was going to endorse Donald Trump. But apparently he hasn't. And he's refusing to do so. The title of the video is Why Rand Paul Still Won't Endorse Trump Despite Biden's Weakness. Let's watch.
President Biden attempting to squash any fears about his age in a new political ad for battleground states.
I know I'm not a young man, but I know how to do this job. When you get knocked down, you get back up.
Woo.
Senator Rand Paul has been sounding the alarm on the president's mental acuity for months, and he joins us now. Senator, good morning. Great to see you. So just Team Biden's trying to argue that the president is fit for the job, that he may be older, but what we saw last Thursday night was not normal.
And I don't know if this video will come out before some of the other ones I've recorded or not, but this is just not the case. Biden has been a feeble old man for years now. People have been pointing it out since almost day one of his presidency of how feeble he in fact is. And so I'm just tired of this. Like, we didn't know this before. We're so shocked. No, the point is that people weren't really paying attention before. Most normies don't pay attention to news on a day-to-day basis. They just kind of, maybe they'll read a couple headlines. They'll see a couple memes maybe on their kid's Facebook page or whatever. But they don't really follow it this closely. And when you're forced to watch 90 minutes of a Joe Biden not looking great, it kind of forces you to realize oh, maybe my right-wing friends are not so fucking crazy. Maybe Joe Biden is actually demented. I just wanted to say that just in case, whatever.
Definitely not. What was your take on watching the president, given your observations over the past couple of months?
My concern is that weakness invites tragedy. With the evacuation in Afghanistan, and this is, a year or two ago now, the weakness of it, retreating from a commercial airport instead of retreating if we were going to leave from the Air Force Base at Bagram, which would have been a much more sound military strategy. In that weakness, 13 soldiers died. But then the reaction also comes from a point of weakness and perhaps related to senility, is that he overreacts. And so he says, well, we must do something, and I must show that I'm not weak. And so there's an overreaction, and they killed an aid worker and several children with a drone because we must do something. The world thinks I'm weak. Americans think I'm weak. They think I'm ineffectual, so I have to do more. So really the problem with weakness often isn't inaction, it's overaction and response. But it also sends a signal to the world that America doesn't know what it's doing. Mm-hmm. And, we saw the warnings from Khomeini recently from the Ayatollah saying something's going to happen somewhere around the world at one of your bases. And I take that at face value, and I think we have to be prepared. But I think we have to be cognizant that weakness leads to overreaction, could lead to something much worse.
Yeah,
So his first point there about the way that we left Afghanistan, it was very weak. There were other ways to do it. I obviously don't want those 13 soldiers to die or whatever he was talking about. Obviously you don't want that to happen. But I kind of get tired of this argument that, it was so bad that we left, or the way that we left. We could have done it differently. We could have stayed an extra 6 months and got all of our equipment out. We could have, all this stuff. At the end of the day, I'm glad it's over. It was a waste of time to go there. I would have hoped that it would have served as a lesson to everybody that we should not be burdened down in these quagmires, these never-ending wars, these forever wars is what they call them. I would hope that we would have learned something from that. Clearly not, because we're getting bogged down in Ukraine, and now we're getting dragged into Israel and Iran and Palestine and whoever else. We're gonna fight the whole world. We obviously haven't learned our lesson. But one less war is better than continuing the wars, or it's not quite the right time for us to leave. Those kind of arguments. I don't think that Rand Paul's making that argument. I just think it's a weak argument to say, to complain about the weakness. Ironically, about it's a weak argument to complain about the weakness of the president in the way that he left or whatever. Whether or not you want to say it was a disaster or not, it was a good thing that we're no longer involved in Afghanistan. And I think we do a disservice not to recognize that. To the rest of his point about, the weakness of our president, it's funny because in a previous video that I was recording, one of the people were saying, like Joe Biden's not about ego. And I made the comment that, he's challenged people to push-up contests. One of the biggest moments of the debate was him, lashing out at Donald Trump, talking about his golf swing, like who had the better golf swing. And I'll accept your challenge to a golf thing. I said I'd do it if you carry your own bag. You think you can do it? You think you can do it, little boy? Like, it's stupid shit like that. Like, yes, that is obviously a concern. And I think it does speak to what do you say? The senility, to Joe Biden being senile. I think it definitely does speak to that, because that's what grumpy old men do, is like, you challenge them like, yeah, you're not a real man, Joe. Yes, I am. I'll kick your ass. I'll kick your ass right now. You don't think I can do it? Oh, fat. Like, I think there is something to be said there. So that's Rand Paul's reaction to the debate, that Joe Biden looked weak. He looked stoned. Let's see what else he has to say.
The country is facing big issues, big threats. The New York Times puts it this way. They said the image of the nation has become some combination of unhinged and doddering, especially striking at a time when the U.S. is supposed to be leading the fight against a rising alliance of autocracies that includes China, Russia, and Iran. Also, of course, Senator, over the weekend, the U.S. military was warned in Europe that a credible intel threat for a terrorist attack was in place over the next week or so. So while back home we're having this debate about Joe Biden's mental acuity and, trying to debunk these lies from the White House about whether he actually is having these problems or not, the rest of the world is watching, and the adversaries, as you say, are taking advantage of that weakness.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, like she said, people, there are global leaders across the world. Obviously, I'm not really in favor of like a strong, a strong leader. I don't think that that's necessarily the correct answer, but I do think that our leader should be strong. I just don't mean it in like a dictatorial way, right? Nothing like that. Nothing like you see in these third world banana republic dictatorships or whatever. Not that sort of strong leader, but I think strong in the sense that you're not going to mess with this guy. And I think that is one advantage that Donald Trump certainly has over Joe Biden, is that people knew when Trump was in there that he wasn't messing around. He killed, what was it Soleimani or whatever, the guy that he said he died like a dog, that guy they went after, the other guy that they bombed. There was that, during the live stream, we watched a video that was explaining, a conversation that Donald Trump had with a foreign leader, and said, like, look, if you go back on this deal, I'll kill you. And like showed him a picture of his house or whatever, and just kind of like walked out of the room after that, kind of like mic drop moment. Like, whether you like Trump or don't like Trump, you have to see that, when Donald Trump says, don't do this, I'll fucking kill you, that's a lot more, that's commanding a lot more respect from these tin pot dictators than Joe Biden going up on stage and saying don't. Like, oh, this person's thinking about doing this awful thing. What do you have to say to them, Joe Biden? Don't. Or what? Or what is what any bully or tin pot dictator would say. So, I think there is value in having peace through strength. I do think there is value in that, and so we'll see what Rand Paul has to say about it. He always looks stoned every time I pause it.
Well, and I think that you can see in contrast Donald Trump. Donald Trump, probably like very few other leaders, projects strength. He sometimes is bombastic, but nobody believes that he will sit idly by. But interestingly, and I've been around him when we were attacked, we had a drone shot down by the Iranians, and around him were many other people like, we've got to do something. We must bomb Tehran. We must invade Iran. And his response was much more reasoned, but his response was also such that he cared about every soldier, and he knew for every reaction there'd be a reaction, and that he was concerned, how many Iranian soldiers will we kill? How many will they come back and kill? And it was a very thoughtful process, much more so than I think people give Donald Trump credit for. But I think by projecting strength, you're allowed to have a more measured response. If you project weakness, like Biden does, then you become hysterical that I must do something, we must attack, we must invade, because otherwise I will look weak. Right. So I think if you can project strength like Donald Trump does, it may actually save us and prevent us from entering into war needlessly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point that I was making, right? Is like, you speak softly, carry a big stick. Well, Donald Trump speaks loudly and carries a big stick. But, to his point, too, about Biden projecting weakness, simple, like, don't do that. Like, those kinds of responses obviously aren't going to dissuade somebody from doing something reprehensible. But also, if you know that you're perceived as being weak, then you are going to feel the need, or you're going to feel the necessity to strike back with double force, right? Like, if everybody says that you're weak and you don't think that you're weak, but an opportunity presents itself, you might, hit them with the wrath of God. You know what I mean? You might drop the mother of all bombs, let's say, to try to prove to everybody that, no, you're not weak. And so that's very dangerous as well, especially, like I said, if it's somebody with the decline of Joe Biden, it just doesn't make it better. He's not stoned this time. Let's go.
Panic never gives us good results in terms of policy, whether it's domestic or foreign policy. Senator, you've been a supporter of President Trump. The RNC convention is in about 2 weeks' time in Milwaukee. Are you going to give him your full endorsement?
I have told them I'm persuadable, but I'm going to need a little bit more of a conversation. If they're willing to have the conversation, I'm open to the discussion.
On what issue specifically?
Economy.
Well, the debt. I mean, there was about $8 trillion worth of debt added under the Trump administration. There will be about $8 trillion added under the Biden administration. I'm a deficit hawk. I ran for Congress because we have so much debt added. And so we have to do a better job on draining the swamp. The FDA under Trump with Scott Gottlieb, he went right out the revolving door back over to Pfizer and then began suppressing speech on Twitter. So there are some things I would like help with the COVID investigation. And if Donald Trump is willing to say, when I am elected, I'm going to release all of the information for the presidency for my investigation, that would go a long way towards getting me.
Okay, well, if
see, you just made it too easy. Hang on, let's
you decide to do the endorsement, please come back and let us know. Senator Rand Paul, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, so he made it too easy, because if you remember, Donald Trump 2016 said a lot of those things. He said, like, oh yeah, we're going to release all the information about, whatever thing. We're going to take care of the debt. We got all these problems. We got to run it like a business, all this kind of stuff. That was the rhetoric. That was the campaign talk. That was campaign Trump. Then Trump gets elected, and like he says, runs up another $8 trillion in debt. And like, to put that in like perspective, here, let me pull this up. I was going to go try to find the source again, but, I'm just going to use our X feed, which you should follow, at Real Swampcast. But, I put this up there because, somebody put out this meme that was, and Rand Paul was part of the Tea Party, saying, this is how it happened, that the Tea Party, drugged the GOP to victory, and then MAGA came along and got too big and ate the GOP, as if the MAGA movement was something to do with the Tea Party. And I pointed out in our tweet that, these things are not the same. The Tea Party was about fiscal responsibility, like Rand Paul has just alluded to there, and the MAGA movement was about putting America first. There is overlap, but if MAGA was truly of the Tea Party, they wouldn't have voted in favor of the largest debt spending increases since Obama. And the screenshot that I pulled here was from, Braves AI or whatever, but I had it look up, debt by president. So in perspective, Donald Trump put up $8.2 trillion in debt, a 40% increase. Barack Obama in 8 years had $8.3 trillion in debt. So had Donald Trump continued on his trajectory at that time, he would have doubled the debt under Obama. So that's just crazy. And so I think I think the problem here is that Rand Paul has kind of made it too easy for Donald Trump. All Donald Trump has to say is that he's going to get the debt under control, that he's going to release all the information about COVID, that he's going to assist him in his prosecution of that to drain the swamp. The problem with that is that these are all things that Donald Trump has said before, and Donald Trump dropped the ball. In 2016, I thought Donald Trump was probably the best person in the race. I was not inspired by Jorgensen or anybody else that was running at the time. And I figured, well, with Donald Trump, with Hillary Clinton, absolutely not. Like, absolutely fucking not. We know exactly who she is. We know what she's about. Unacceptable by any rights. My preferred party's candidate, not all that inspiring. No chance to win. Nothing really to fight for there. So not super inspired. But with Donald Trump, at that time, it was kind of a roll of the dice. And it was a decent roll because he was, like I said, he was saying all of the right things. That we need to get this debt under control, that we have to deal with these unfunded liabilities, that we have to, the stock market is just bullshit. It's because, you also have inflation and all these things. And then when he got elected, he just kind of let it happen. I don't know if you guys remember, but there were all of these debt fights over and over and over again. All the government shutdowns and stuff. And, Trump even at one point went as far as to say, you can blame me for the shutdown. I don't give a shit. We don't need to pass this thing. And then they ended up passing it anyway. And Donald Trump ended up signing it anyway. Like, all of his bluster and everything was for nothing. My point is, Donald Trump's going to say whatever he needs to say to get elected. Partially for his own benefit and his own interests, similar to Joe Biden. These people, let's not pretend these guys are saints or statesmen or are doing this for the benefit of everyone and all this kind of stuff. They might tell themselves that. They might say that on the campaign trail. At the end of the day, they're in it for themselves. They are in it for legacy. They're in it for whatever reason. It's not that. So I don't think Donald Trump is any different. I think there's a part of Donald Trump that thinks that if he doesn't get elected, that his family's going to be prosecuted forever. And so he needs to win and kind of, be that bulwark to kind of set things straight. There are people who like Trump that say, oh, well, he's learned his lessons from the last time. These lessons were obvious. These lessons were things that he had articulated while he was running for president and then couldn't execute when he was president. All of this to say, I'm glad that Rand Paul hasn't endorsed Joe Biden, or not Joe Biden. He definitely didn't do that. I'm glad that Rand Paul hasn't endorsed Donald Trump yet, but I feel like he's going to. I feel like he set the bar so low for Donald Trump that all Trump has to say is, yes, we're going to take care of the debt. Yes, we're going to find out what happened with COVID. And of course, we're going to drain the swamp. And then Rand Paul's like, oh, he said the magic words. There you go. Discounting his entire history that we've had with Donald Trump being the president and all of the things that he went back on. There were some great things that Donald Trump did, right to try, the regulations where you can only pass one if you get rid of two, things like that. There were things, the tax cuts, as much as people want to say it was only for the wealthier, I don't care who it's for. Cut taxes across the board. Any excuse to cut taxes, I'm for it. So there were things about the Trump presidency, no new wars, you know what I mean? There are many things about the Trump presidency that were good. But Rand Paul is right to call him out on the stuff he got wrong. And if people in libertarian circles and people in, Biden, anti-Trump circles, people who are against both the major candidates, if they spent more time attacking things like this and less time worrying about, January 6th or hush money trials and those kinds of things, if they spent more time focusing on things like this, that would be inspiring. Instead, we want to play identity politics. We want to, get into, culture is important and the culture war is important, I think. But, instead we want to focus on those things instead of calling people out on their legitimate criticisms, which I think Rand Paul, I'll just end it here. I just think Rand Paul is on the right track here. But, given Rand Paul's history, I think ultimately he's going to end up endorsing Donald Trump. And it's unfortunate.